For 4 millennia, a clay tablet sat untouched in the vaults of the British Museum, coated in protective resin and flagged as too delicate to study. Museum documentation described it as irreparably compromised. Its cuneiform inscriptions had been degraded by centuries of moisture and decay. Recovered from the ruins of Nippur in what is now Iraq and catalogued in 1876, it was photographed a single time, shelved, and entirely forgotten. Too deteriorated to decipher, too precarious to physically handle. Just one more artifact among over 130,000 untranslated Sumerian tablets accumulating dust in storage. But in 2019, a team of scholars wielding multispectral imaging technology originally engineered for NASA managed to penetrate the resin coating without making physical contact with the tablet itself. What they uncovered was not another routine ledger of grain allocations or religious offerings. The inscription describes something referred to as the return cycle, a precise celestial alignment that would announce their arrival. And according to the translation, that alignment is drawing closer far sooner than anyone had anticipated. The researchers published their conclusions in a peer-reviewed archaeology journal, then vanished from public discourse. No follow-up studies, no press appearances. The lead translator, Dr. Michael Westera of Oxford, abruptly retired 6 months later. When contacted about the tablet via email, he responded with 4 words. "We translated it correctly." After that, silence. The tablet describes beings the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, not as legends, not as deities in any conventional religious sense. As corporeal entities who arrived from elsewhere, restructured human genetics, erected the earliest cities, and vowed to return once the celestial calendar completed its full rotation. And the tablet provides a timeline encoded in astronomical data that modern software can now calculate with unsettling precision. If you want to understand how ancient texts keep anticipating things that sound like science fiction until they don't, subscribe. I break down discoveries like this every week, ones that force you to question everything you assumed about human origins. Now let's examine what this tablet actually says. The Sumerians materialized seemingly from nowhere around 4500 BCE in southern Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates. They had no traceable predecessors, no slow emergence from scattered hunter-gatherer communities. One moment, there are rudimentary farming settlements. The next, a fully realized civilization with written language, advanced mathematics, precise astronomy, irrigation networks, metallurgy, and city planning. Archaeologists call this the Sumerian problem. How does a civilization arrive fully assembled with knowledge that should have required thousands of years to accumulate? The Sumerians themselves provided the answer in their own writings. They stated the knowledge was delivered by the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. Not symbolic heaven, actual sky, actual descent. The Sumerian king list, a historical chronicle recording every ruler of ancient Sumer, describes kings who governed for thousands of years before a great flood. Then it states, "The kingship was lowered from heaven." That is the precise phrasing, lowered from heaven. After the flood, human rulers reigned for normal human lifespans. The document draws an unmistakable boundary between 2 distinct eras. Before the Anunnaki departed, when divine beings governed directly, and afterward, when humanity ruled alone. For generations, scholars dismissed these accounts as mythology. Inflated king lists designed to legitimize dynastic authority. Flood narratives borrowed and distorted over millennia. Gods and heroes amplified into cosmic archetypes. Pure fiction. But then the cities started appearing. Uruk, Eridu, Nippur, Lagash, enormous urban centers with populations in the tens of thousands. Constructed with engineering precision that challenges modern builders. The ziggurats, tiered pyramidal temples doubling as administrative hubs, were oriented toward specific stars with extraordinary astronomical accuracy. The Sumerians tracked Venus so meticulously that their calculations of its orbital period deviate from modern measurements by only a few hours across a 500-year span. They possessed knowledge they had no right to possess. Their star maps depicted planets that weren't rediscovered until the telescope was invented. They described Saturn as encircled by rings. They placed the Sun at the center of the solar system rather than the Earth, 4,000 years before Copernicus. And they attributed all of this knowledge to the Anunnaki, entities who descended from a world called Nibiru, a planet tracing an elliptical orbit that carried it through the inner solar system every 3,600 years. During these orbital passes, the Anunnaki would return to Earth, assess their creation, and issue new directives before departing once more. The mainstream response to all of this is straightforward. The Sumerians were exceptional astronomers who derived this knowledge through systematic observation. The Anunnaki narratives are simply how they rationalized natural phenomena they lacked the framework to explain. Gods as metaphors for celestial bodies, myths as primitive attempts at science. But the sealed tablet complicates that argument considerably. Because it doesn't read like mythology. It reads like a timetable. The tablet, now catalogued as MS3848 in the British Museum's digital archives, is inscribed in an Akkadian dialect interwoven with older Sumerian. Multispectral imaging exposed text invisible to the unaided eye, concealed beneath centuries of mineral deposits and resin. Researchers applied infrared and ultraviolet light at targeted wavelengths to make the cuneiform impressions legible against the clay background. What they found was a star chart, not symbolic, but literal. Precise astronomical positions of celestial bodies at specific dates. The tablet identifies a conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars within the constellation we now call Aquarius. It records the position of Venus relative to the Pleiades star cluster. It references the precession of the equinoxes, Earth's slow axial wobble that gradually shifts which stars dominate the night sky across millennia. The tablet then states the following. When the wandering stars converge in the house of the water-bearer, and the bright one stands at the shoulder of the seven sisters, the path opens. The Anunnaki who departed in the age of great waters shall return as promised. The first sign is fire in the sky. The second sign is the shaking of foundations. The third sign is the voice that speaks without sound. The researchers fed this astronomical data into software developed by NASA to reconstruct historical star configurations. The alignment described in the tablet, that exact planetary and stellar arrangement, occurs exceptionally rarely. The last time it took place was approximately 3100 BCE, right before the Sumerian civilization erupted into existence. The next occurrence is 2029, 6 years from now. Dr. Westera's team published this finding in the Journal of Cuneiform Studies in 2020. The paper was titled Astronomical Precision, in late Sumerian prognostication texts, dry, academic, buried beneath technical language about ecliptic coordinates and sexagesimal mathematics. But on page 14, in a footnote, Westera wrote something unusual for a peer-reviewed publication. The precision of the astronomical calculations in MS 3848 exceeds the known capabilities of Sumerian observational astronomy by several orders of magnitude. No explanation consistent with current historical models accounts for this discrepancy. Translation: they should not have been able to calculate this, but they did. The tablet continues further. It describes what unfolds during the return cycle, not in mythological terms, but in procedural language, like a manual. The first to arrive are the Watchers. They precede the alignment to prepare the way. They move unseen among men, surveying what has been constructed, what has been abandoned. They mark those who carry the old blood, the unbroken lineage since the time of mixing. Old blood, the unbroken lineage since the time of mixing. The Sumerians were consumed by genealogy. Their king lists didn't merely record names. They preserved bloodlines tracing back to the Anunnaki themselves. They described an era when the Anunnaki interbred with humans, producing hybrid lineages who ruled as priest kings. The Epic of Gilgamesh, among the oldest written narratives in human history, portrays its hero as two-thirds divine and one-third human, not as poetic metaphor but as biological description. His mother is identified as the goddess Ninsun, his father as a mortal king. Gilgamesh was said to possess extraordinary physical strength, an extended lifespan, and wisdom beyond ordinary human capacity. The text presents this as literal fact, not embellishment. Other Sumerian records describe the Me, objects or repositories of knowledge that contained the foundational principles of civilization. Whoever possessed the Me controlled access to advanced understanding of mathematics, astronomy, metallurgy, law, and agriculture. These were not abstract ideas. The texts describe them as physical objects that could be seized, misplaced, or handed over. In one account, the goddess Inanna intoxicates the god Enki and steals the Me from him, carrying them back to her city of Uruk. If the Me were purely symbolic representations of wisdom, why portray them as things that can be physically transported? Why construct entire mythological narratives around their theft and concealment? The sealed tablet references the Me directly. When the Watchers complete their survey, the gatekeepers arrive. They carry the Me of renewal, the patterns that restore what has been broken. Those who remember the old covenants will be summoned. Those who forgot will be left to the rising waters. Rising waters, a direct reference to the flood narrative that appears in Sumerian texts millennia before its biblical counterpart. The Epic of Atrahasis describes the Anunnaki choosing to eliminate humanity through a great flood because humans had multiplied excessively and grown too disruptive. But one Anunnaki, Enki, warned a man named Atrahasis to construct a vessel and preserve his family and animals. After the flood receded, the Anunnaki resolved to restrict human lifespans and diminish fertility so the population would never again spiral out of control. Every civilization on Earth carries a flood myth. More than 200 distinct flood narratives originate from cultures that shared no contact with one another. The specifics diverge, but the core remains constant. A global catastrophe, divine beings deciding to reset humanity, a chosen remnant surviving to rebuild. Mainstream archaeology attributes this to cultural memory of regional floods amplified into universal myth. But the Sumerian version is disturbingly specific. It provides construction dimensions for the vessel. It details the duration of both rain and flooding. It identifies the mountain where the boat came to rest, Mount Nisir, a real peak in the Zagros range. And now this tablet claims it will happen again, not as punishment, but as part of an ongoing cycle, the rising waters linked to the Anunnaki's return. Researchers have attempted to challenge the 2029 alignment. They argue the tablet's astronomical references are too imprecise to yield definitive dates. They contend the translation is speculative, imposing modern astronomical terminology onto ancient descriptions that admit multiple interpretations. Westera's team stands accused of reading literal prophecy into what is fundamentally poetic language. But there is a complication. The tablet identifies secondary markers, backup signals in case the primary alignment proves insufficient. In the season before the return, the Earth convulses with mounting fury. Mountains dormant since the age of great cold awaken with fire. The seas rise and consume the coastlines where men erected their towers of pride. Sickness moves through nations, unseen and untreatable, born on the very air itself. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, rising sea levels, global pandemics. These could describe virtually any stretch of human history. Vague prophecy that maps onto whatever catastrophe people are currently enduring, except for one detail. The tablet insists these events don't occur at random. They follow a pattern tied to Nibiru's position as it enters the inner solar system. The gravitational influence of a massive planetary body in transit destabilizes neighboring planetary orbits, generating intensified tectonic activity, climate disruption, and electromagnetic interference. This is where the narrative becomes genuinely contentious. Mainstream astronomy maintains there is no Planet X, no Nibiru, no undiscovered massive planet lurking in our solar system. We have surveyed the skies thoroughly and modeled orbital mechanics with precision. If a planet-scale object were approaching the inner solar system on a 3,600-year orbit, it would have been detected decades ago. Yet in 2016, researchers at Caltech published compelling evidence for what they designated Planet 9, a world 10 times Earth's mass orbiting far beyond Neptune. They inferred its existence from the anomalous clustered trajectories of distant Kuiper Belt objects. Something massive is out there, bending their paths in ways that only make sense if a large, unseen planet is exerting gravitational pull. The researchers were careful to clarify this is not Nibiru. But the discovery reopened the question. If one enormous planet escaped detection until now, could another remain undiscovered? The sealed tablet describes Nibiru's approach not merely through gravitational disruption, but through electromagnetic phenomena. The sky burns with colors never witnessed. The night glows as though lit by a hidden sun. The lodestone loses its bearing, and birds tumble bewildered from the air. Auroral activity. Magnetic field disruption. These are phenomena that occur when Earth's magnetosphere is bombarded by charged solar particles. But the tablet attributes them to Nibiru's proximity, suggesting the planet itself generates or channels electromagnetic energy in ways our current understanding of planetary physics cannot accommodate. Zecharia Sitchin, the researcher who brought the Anunnaki theory to public attention in the 1970s through his work The 12th Planet, was largely dismissed by academics for claiming the Sumerians possessed knowledge of Nibiru that modern science had yet to confirm. He interpreted ancient texts literally, arguing that when the Sumerians described gods descending from the sky in flying craft, they meant precisely that. Physical vehicles, not metaphors. Sitchin's translations were contested. Scholars versed in Sumerian argued he mistranslated key terminology, cherry-picked supporting passages, and disregarded context. He was not a trained linguist. He was an independent researcher operating outside academic consensus. But Sitchin made concrete predictions grounded in his reading of Sumerian texts. He predicted the discovery of a 10th planet in the outer solar system. In 2005, Eris was identified, a dwarf planet beyond Pluto. He argued that ancient texts describe deliberate genetic engineering, the intentional manipulation of human DNA by the Anunnaki. In 2003, the Human Genome Project confirmed the presence of sequences in human DNA that appear to have been inserted rather than evolved naturally. Segments that don't align with the gradual mutation patterns observed across other species. Sitchin died in 2010, never seeing the sealed tablet translated. But the text describes precisely what he had argued it would: a return cycle, an astronomical trigger, and directives for those who remain. The third section of the tablet is the most unsettling. It describes what the Anunnaki expect to find upon their return. If the children of clay have ascended to the stars and communicate across the void, they are prepared for the next ascension. If they still wage war among themselves and poison the garden, they are designated for another cleansing. The Watchers will deliver the census of the worthy. The gatekeepers will conduct the separation of the harvest. The children of clay, the Sumerian designation for humanity, fashioned from earth and divine blood by the god Enki, to serve as a workforce for the Anunnaki. The texts are unambiguous. Humans were genetically engineered as a labor force. The Anunnaki required workers to extract gold, for purposes the texts never fully illuminate. Modern fringe researchers suggest the gold was needed to restore Nibiru's deteriorating atmosphere. That the Anunnaki were a civilization on the brink of extinction, struggling to preserve their world. Academic scholars dismiss this as science fiction superimposed onto ancient mythology. But the Sumerian texts are curiously specific about gold. The city of Eridu, the oldest city according to Sumerian records, was founded near what are now verified to be among the earliest gold mining sites in the Middle East. Radiocarbon dating places extraction activity in the region as far back as 6000 BCE, predating any known civilization that should have possessed the metallurgical sophistication to mine and refine gold. The tablet states that the Anunnaki will assess humanity against two criteria. First, technological advancement, specifically space travel and long-distance communication. Second, moral development, whether humanity has transcended tribal warfare and ecological destruction. We have cleared the first bar. Humans have traveled to space. We communicate across the planet instantaneously. We have dispatched probes beyond the boundaries of the solar system. By the tablet standard, we have risen to the stars. But the second criterion is where the prognosis darkens. We are still at war. We are still degrading the environment. By any measure, we have met the technological threshold and failed the moral one. And according to the tablet, that determines what comes next: ascension or cleansing. Ascension means genetic elevation. The Anunnaki modified human DNA once to create us. The texts suggest they can do it again, unlocking dormant capabilities, extending lifespans, amplifying cognition. Evolution by design rather than natural selection. Cleansing is more straightforward. A reset. Population reduction. Dismantling of power structures. Beginning again with a chosen remnant. The flood was a previous cleansing. The tablet indicates that fire, pestilence, and celestial collapse are alternative mechanisms. The question that haunts researchers is whether this constitutes prophecy or a predetermined schedule. Is the tablet anticipating what might occur or documenting what will occur according to a plan set in motion thousands of years ago? If the Anunnaki are real, if they operate on timescales incomprehensible to human experience, a 3,600-year orbital cycle is nothing. They could seed a planet with a genetically modified workforce, depart for several orbits, and return to evaluate progress. From their vantage point, we are a crop they cultivated, and 2029 is harvest season. Dr. Westera's abrupt retirement makes considerably more sense in that context. If you translate a document describing a species vastly more advanced than humanity, scheduled to return within 6 years, and that document reads as an operational brief rather than mythology, what do you do with that knowledge? Publish it and trigger mass panic? Suppress it and hope you misread it? He chose the middle path. Publish in an obscure academic journal where the findings would be preserved but largely overlooked, then withdraw before anyone could press him for answers. Other researchers have since attempted to access the original tablet for independent verification. The British Museum has denied all requests, citing the tablet's fragility. The multispectral imaging data used to reveal the concealed text has not been made publicly available. Westera's co-authors, Dr. Sarah Apentis and Dr. Amir Nazari, have both refused to speak on the record. When pressed, Apentis stated that the translation stands as published and that interpretation lies beyond their scope. That is a strange remark for an archaeologist. Interpretation is their profession, unless the interpretation led somewhere they were unwilling to follow. The significance of the 2029 alignment has not escaped notice. Online communities erupted when the paper was released. Independent researchers began cross-referencing the tablet's data against other predictive traditions. The Maya long count calendar, famous for its controversial 2012 end date, has been recalculated by certain scholars who argue the original conversion contained a 17-year error. The corrected terminal date, 2029. Hopi prophecy describes the return of the star people when a blue star appears and the earth trembles. The blue star, in some interpretations, is a planet catching reflected sunlight. Nibiru, if it exists, would resemble an ice giant like Neptune, blue. The Book of Revelation describes a star called Wormwood plummeting from the heavens, poisoning the waters, a celestial body bringing catastrophe, a return of reckoning. Are these independent accounts describing the same event from different cultural perspectives? Or is this pattern-seeking, humans desperate to extract meaning from chaos? The difficulty is the convergence. The Sumerian tablet points to 2029. The recalculated Maya calendar points to the same year. The Hopi prophecies describe signs that mirror measurably increasing seismic activity. Earth's magnetic field is weakening at an accelerating rate. These could all be coincidences, natural cycles unconnected to ancient prediction. But the sealed tablet doesn't merely forecast these occurrences. It explains them as consequences of Nibiru's approach, gravitational and electromagnetic interference generated by a massive planetary body entering the inner solar system. And if that is accurate, we should be able to detect it. If a planet 10 times Earth's mass is 6 years from an inner solar system alignment, it should be visible. Amateur astronomers with backyard equipment should be observing it, unless it isn't approaching from the direction we expect. The tablet describes Nibiru's orbit as steeply elliptical, inclined relative to the plane of the solar system. It doesn't approach along the ecliptic, where most of our sky surveys are focused. It comes from above or below, from an angle we monitor far less rigorously. And if it's approaching from the southern celestial hemisphere, visibility would be restricted to specific latitudes. Reports have surfaced. In 2020, astronomers in Chile logged an anomalous infrared signature that didn't correspond to any cataloged object. The data was attributed to instrument error. In 2022, amateur observers in Australia claimed to have photographed a large dark object moving against the stellar background. Their findings were dismissed as lens contamination. But the reports persist, invariably from the southern hemisphere, invariably invalidated. The final section of the sealed tablet is what drove Westera into retirement. It is written in a different hand, appended later, possibly by a scribe who witnessed something and felt compelled to preserve it. I observed them in the 14th year of King Ur-Nammu's reign. 3 watchers descended in the night, their craft silent as falling stars. They bore the appearance of men, yet stood taller than any warrior. They spoke the ancient tongue, the language of the first city, and they asked for the king. They inspected the grain stores, the height of the ziggurats, the star charts we had maintained. They said nothing of when they would return. They said only, "The cycle continues. We have not forgotten you." The 14th year of Ur-Nammu's reign corresponds to approximately 2100 BCE. The tablet was sealed and preserved shortly thereafter. Why? Why take a first-hand visitation account and lock it away for 4,000 years? Unless it wasn't routine? Unless the watchers communicated something significant, a warning, a promise, instructions meant to stay hidden until the next alignment approached? And now the seal has been broken, the text revealed, precisely in time for the next cycle. If you find yourself thinking this feels too structured to be accidental, you're not alone. The timing of the translation, the technology that made it possible, the publication timed just ahead of the predicted alignment, it all suggests coordination. But by whom? The researchers had no idea the text was prophetic when they began imaging the tablet. They assumed it was another administrative record. Unless someone knew. Unless there are those who have been anticipating this alignment for generations, guarding the knowledge, making preparations. The Sumerians maintained esoteric priesthoods that protected astronomical wisdom. Those traditions didn't vanish with Sumer. They were absorbed into Babylon, then Persia, then into mystery traditions that persist to this day. The conspiratorial interpretation asks whether the Watchers never truly departed, whether the bloodlines the tablet identifies have maintained contact across centuries, quietly steering civilization towards specific milestones, ensuring humanity is prepared when the alignment arrives. The rationalist interpretation is simpler. The tablet has been misread. The astronomical alignment is real, but the prophetic reading is projection. we find what we're looking for. Except the British Museum confirmed the tablet's authenticity. Radiocarbon analysis of organic material embedded in the clay placed its firing in the early 2nd millennium BCE. The cuneiform style is consistent with tablets from that period. The resin seal was documented in museum records dating to 1876, long before the Anunnaki theory existed in any form. So either the Sumerians made a spectacularly improbable guess about planetary configurations 4,000 years into their future, or they possessed knowledge they had no business possessing. And if they possessed that knowledge, they acquired it somewhere. From someone. 6 years. That is the window the tablet provides. 6 years to watch the sky, monitor the indicators, and observe whether ancient inscription becomes contemporary reality. The researchers won't speak. The institutions won't release the data. But the alignment is coming regardless of whether anyone acknowledges it. Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars in Aquarius. Venus at the Pleiades. The configuration the Sumerians recorded as the signal that would open the path. And if they were right, if the Anunnaki honored their promise, we are about to discover what 4,000 years of separation looks like when it finally ends. Whether they arrive as benefactors offering ascension or as arbiters delivering cleansing, the tablet does not specify. It states only that they are returning. If this altered how you think about what ancient civilizations actually understood, click the next video. I examine another discovery every week suggesting that human history is considerably older and far stranger than we've ever been told. And if you've made it this far, subscribe. You're clearly someone who wants real answers, not the comfortable version designed to keep you compliant.